All right, so thank you for coming tonight. I know there's a Seahawks game on. When I left my house, which I briefly stopped in to say goodnight to my twins, which was not as brief as I'd hoped it would be, we were winning, so that's good. Yes, and I'm going to try and get you guys out of here on time so you can see the end of the game, because I, too, am a Seahawks fan, and I would love to see Russell Wilson go down in flames. I've been no, I'm not a traitor. I've been anti-Broncos my entire life. It's ingrained in my being, and so once he joined the Broncos, I unliked him on Instagram, and that's the end of that. Thank you. Okay, so welcome to Senior Parent Night, where we are going to talk football and scholarships and colleges and all the things. So my name is Mrs. Irving, and even though I sound like I'm not a Christian woman, we are going to begin all things like we do at Bellarmine with a prayer. So we're going to start with something that's called the Counselor's Prayer, which has hung on my wall since I started at Bellarmine, and is kind of my guiding prayer. Lord, let me always remember that it is you who give beauty and health to all life. Grant me the vision to recognize your beauty in all of those I meet. Give me the words to help my students see the beauty and the potential healing within themselves, and share with me the skill to let that beauty and radiant health shine. Keep me mindful of the fact that my connection with my students begins long before they leave home to come to me. Let me remember that they are on their way to me, and let me prepare a proper welcome for their arrival. I know that listening is a great gift, but there is one greater: healing. Let me still my busy mind to hear my students' deepest questions and concerns. By my response, let my students know that I have listened and heard. Flow through me that my words and my actions will always touch every individual with respect. Let students feel my confidence based on experience, gentleness based on caring, and healing based on the spirit of our relationship. Grant me the wisdom to turn to my students every visit into an experience. Let me always treat them as they wish to be treated. Let me serve as if they were the only person in my life. Remind me that for the time we are together, that is the truth. Grant me the courage to send my students back into life with the knowledge, the guidance, and the inspiration they need to continue their ongoing radiant health. Let my service go with them until we meet again, for only then will I be worthy of my reward. Amen. So tonight I want to introduce to you our Fearless Counseling team, who we have had going for finally 2 years in a row, all of us together. Myself, Mrs. Irving, I am in charge of Mr. Barnes, Mrs. Phillips, and Mrs. White's formation teams. So if you have those students, I am the person who is guiding them through this hopefully less anxiety-inducing senior year. Mr. Scotty, Chris Scotty, who has Mr. Garcia and Mr. Sweeney. Mrs. Wilson, who has Ms. Lewis and Ms. Shen and Mrs. Minus, and Mrs. Keene, who has Ms. Matthew and Mrs. Minharis. So that is our counseling team. So if you have questions, you at least know who you're talking to when you're sending those emails and sending those voicemails on the phone. So now we're going to turn it over to Rick Morton, who is going to talk to you about graduation packets from Justin's.
Have you guys ever had a perfect day? Perfect day? I had one years ago, San Diego. My wife and I were raising our kids. Went to the beach, the La Jolla Shores. If you've ever been, it's a beautiful beach in the La Jolla Shores. And we had our family in town from Washington visiting. We had 2 cars. We got there early, had a fire pit, did the whole barbecue, had time in the sand, in the water. My youngest son, Jonathan, at the time was 5, and his favorite beach was La Jolla because it had the best playground. And so he was super psyched. Well, this perfect day comes to an end. We pack everything up, get our cars going, we head on home, and my wife was the first one at the door, and the telephone rang. She picked up the phone, and her face went from perfect calm to a panic when she heard, "Mom, this is Jonathan. You left me at the beach." So my perfect day went unperfect very quickly. And my wife and I left our 5-year-old son at a beach a half hour from my house, parent of the year. And I just want to share that because like my wife and I, we love being parents, but we messed up a lot. And I don't know about you, but maybe you can go home now and feel better about yourselves because at least you didn't leave your kid at the beach, right? But my wife and I, we own the local Jostens franchise, and we love serving families and seniors as they go through this amazing time. I love reminding parents that because they're like almost an adult, but they still need a hug and a reminder that you love them. I have 3 adult children and absolutely love them, and they're very different. My oldest was probably my biggest challenge. Somebody wise once said, Rick, every kid has a gift, they just don't open their packages at the same time. I'm like, how true is that? But so I'm here just to kind of let you know the basics. Tomorrow morning, I have the privilege of meeting with your seniors to talk about sort of finishing strong their senior year. We're going to cover some of the important ordering information and some of the celebration stuff, but you get to hear tonight just the real shortcut version of tomorrow's meeting. So every year, the students order their caps and gowns for graduation. That is the only thing you and your families need to order. It's normally $55, but we're going to have a senior order week for starting on the 18th of September, going until the 24th. Yes, oh man, faces from the blood. During that time, it's going to be $20 off, so it's $35. So that, again, that's the only thing you guys need to order. There is a bunch of other items as well. We have a beautiful graduation announcement. I probably didn't have enough for everyone, but your parent or your students will get this in the morning as well. This flyer just kind of gives some details as to what's available, but the biggest thing is just get it done early, get it out of the way. If there's other things you want to help your students celebrate this amazing senior year, we have all the stuff, but just look through it and see what's best for you and your family. Otherwise, if you have any questions, we're here to help. We're going to deliver all of the announcements, which are custom to your students, and their cap and gowns in the spring. If they order anything else, like the senior, the hoodies and shirts and all that other swag stuff, they're going to get that right away, shipped by UPS right after your order. So other than that, all my information's here. Congratulations, having a senior, and thank you very much for your time. Have a great day. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Rick. So again, he'll be helping you with all your graduation order needs, gear, everything. Students will be looking for that, so please support them in that effort. So I'm here to talk about just our initial application steps. If you remember, we had a senior meeting prep, get ready for right now in the spring, and we reviewed what your seniors needed to be working on. And so at this point, they should have these 3 things completed: senior questionnaire, application plan, and they have matched their Naviance with their Common App. These things sound familiar? Yes? Your seniors have them done? Yeah. Okay, that's okay. So the main thing is the senior questionnaire. All these things are very important to our application process here at Bellarmine. So they are vital, they all have a purpose. So don't allow your seniors to skip through it, because it all helps us lead up to the big thing, which is applying to colleges. And how we support them with that helps us keep everything organized. So keep in mind, we all have about 50 to 75 students that we're doing this for. Those students are all applying to about 9 or more colleges, and we are potentially writing letters for all of them. So it's a lot happening right now, and so this helps us keep organized and to make sure whatever is needed is going to the colleges that they need to be going to for your students, okay? So the senior questionnaire. This is something that we ask the students to complete. It's about a 17-question form where they go into detail about their experience over the last 3 or so more years, okay? We know your seniors by now, mostly all by face and names. We know a little bit about what they're doing and involved, but this allows them to go into detail about what they've been participating in. Things that stand out for them, maybe opportunities where they were recognized, activities, volunteer, leadership opportunities that they have done. And we ask them to expand upon this, okay? We're not just asking you to list everything you've done, but what do those things mean to you? Why were you involved in those things? How long were you involved in those? All that information helps us to add that detail into their letters of recommendation that we're going to write for them, okay? So that we can expand about these passions that they have participated in over the last high school experience. Their teachers as well are going to have access to this, so this can help them nurture their letters the way they need to. And only people who will be able to review their senior questionnaires are the counselor and the teachers that they have identified to write letters of recommendation. All this is stored in Naviance that we can pull it up, and then as we're writing our letters, we can use that information. Does that make sense? Okay. We are asking seniors to have this completed before we will meet with them for their senior meeting. Okay. This allows us that after we meet with them, we'll have everything we need, that we can start working on everything to get ready for their application due date. Next is the application plan. This is also available in Naviance. This is where the students are going to list all of their schools. As you can see on here, there's room for 9. If a student is going to apply to more than 9 schools, they just need to complete a second sheet. We review this together when we meet for their senior meeting so that we can go over all their schools, make sure that these are appropriate lists for them, make sure that they are on the right track, maybe add any feedback or ideas or suggestions that we might think might be good for them to consider. And then we make sure that they have all the information listed, completed. This is going to help them know how many letters of recommendation they need, whether or not their schools require test scores or not, and those very important due dates. Okay? This allows us to meet with your student and we know what they're planning to do. All right? We will sign off on this together, and when they leave our offices, I now know what schools they're planning to apply to, and I know where to send letters and transcripts. If your student makes any changes after that senior meeting to this application plan, it's up to them to make sure they're updating us with an additional application plan or notifying us through email. Some of us will allow that, but please do not have your seniors just, hey, go tell Mrs. Wilson I'm applying to Wazoo now. I will tell you yes, but I will not remember that, okay? So I need you to actually fill out the application plan or send it in email so that we have that information. Because I'm going to be referring to this application plan when I get ready to send letters and transcripts. So if you did not tell me about a school, I can't send it. Does that make sense? Okay, and we're not mind readers. We're pretty good, but we're not that good, okay? So this is the application plan. Again, they need to have this completed, ready to go when they come in for their senior meeting. And then the last important step is matching their Naviance with their Common App. Most of your students will utilize the Common App to apply to schools. The Common App is just an application tool where they can add schools on there, and it allows them to complete the application process within this system and then send the application to all the schools that they have in the Common App. And then we match it to Naviance, so everything they're doing in the Common App, I can send all the required documents through Naviance to match up with their applications. Okay? So any letters that are required, transcripts, any additional documentation, all get sent through Naviance to match up with their application that they're completing in Common App. Okay, so that's kind of how that works. Not all their schools will be on the Common App. A lot of your state schools are not on there. UW is not on there, and your Cali schools are not on there. Oh, UW is on there. No, UW is on there now. Okay, so that is how most students will apply, either through the Common App or directly to a school through their website, okay? Or California has their own application system as well, okay? So those are the 3 steps. If your student needs any support with any of these 3 steps, have them reach out to us, right? But we are communicating these things to them. They know what to do and how to do these things. Your job right now is just reminding them and making sure that they've completed these steps in order to reach out to us to schedule their senior meeting. And that senior meeting should be done 1 month before their earliest deadline. So that allows us to meet with them, know what their plan of colleges they're planning to apply to, be able to contact that teacher for letters of recommendation, have all those materials prepared and ready to go by their deadline. And again, we're doing this for multiple students, so we need that time to prepare. Okay, so it is detrimental for a student to come in 2 weeks before their deadline and say, hey, I need to have this meeting, I need this, this, and this, because it will not give us time to prepare letters, transcripts, and all the materials they need. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So, scheduling their senior meeting, they can do this before school, during lunches, first or second lunch, or after school. Typically, these meetings are about 30 to 40 minutes. There's a question.
Sorry, when is the seniors meeting deadline?
They're within a month before their earliest deadline.
Which is?
So it depends on the colleges they're applying to. So most students, most of our seniors will end up applying early action. That early action deadline for a lot of schools is November 1st. There are some schools on the off chance that have like an October 15th, but that main deadline is November 1st.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So that means a lot of seniors are going to now start coming in October 1, wanting to do their senior meeting, okay? I've had 2 so far of those students who are just kind of on top of it, ready to go. That's helpful, okay? All right. So again, those meetings can be before school, during lunch, or after school, about 30 to 40 minutes. They need to come with those 3 items that we just said: application plan, senior questionnaire, and Naviance matched to their Common App. And then we're prepared to go through their schools, make any recommendations or changes, and talk about how that application plan is going to go, answer any questions, and give advice on scholarships and next steps at that meeting. Okay. After that meeting, if they have additional questions, they can totally reach out. But just keep in mind, we're going to be trying to meet with all our seniors during this time, so it's best for them to come prepared with any questions, and then we can follow up with any answers. Yes.
Does the Common App have to be absolutely completed before the meeting?
No.
The essay and all that?
No. So in order to actually match your Naviance with the Common App, you just have to have a couple steps done. The profile completed, you need to have the FERPA done, and then at least 1 school added, and then it will allow you to match. Yes. Okay, so have your student come see us. All right, yeah. And then there's also a YouTube video you can go to, and it just says matching our Common App to Naviance. There's a lovely woman who will go through the steps on there and take you step by step on how to do that. Okay, and then so just a last reminder about the application process. So we talked about the early action deadline, which is November 1. There's going to be multiple deadlines throughout the application process. Some of your students will apply to colleges who say their deadline isn't until January 1st, all right? That's okay. But here, for our purposes, we encourage students to complete all their applications, have them done and sent by November 30th, okay? That way we can have everything completed for application purposes, letters, transcripts, all documentation done before we leave for Christmas break. Okay, that way they're ready to go, they're done. We've completed everything on our end where everyone's able to go on break, have a nice holiday, and then come back. That way, if students have already completed those applications, that next phase going into 2nd semester, we're just hearing back from schools. Okay, they're just learning whether they got in or not. Okay, versus rushing to try to still be applying to schools where now the deadline is coming up and everyone else is trying to apply too. Okay, the benefit of applying early is that you get to get reviewed early, hear back, and not be considered with the rest of the population who's also applying at the same time. Okay. So in terms of the November 30th, we're talking about all applications. We're encouraging students to be completed with all their applications by the 30th, regardless of that deadline. Early application deadline, typically for most schools, is November 1st. So that means for those students who are applying early action, they would have already applied by November 1st. We would have sent all documentation for them to all their schools, and they're already done. No. Yeah. Students can still consider if they want to apply early action right now. It just depends. Some schools are not requiring test scores, so they could apply without the test score and have the test score sent later. All right, but if it's a school who is requiring test scores, that could hold up their application, not having test scores ready.
But if your student's going to apply early decision, doesn't get in early decision, wants to apply early decision to somewhere else.
Yeah, so it depends on their school. Some private schools will only allow you to apply early decision to only one private school, and then you can apply early action to other schools. Most students who apply early decision, say they get denied, they'll then can say whether they want to be considered for the regular decision pool, and so then their application is considered then. Yeah. A lot of students are not going to apply early action to all their schools. They might have 1 or 2 strategic schools that they want to apply early and then try to meet that regular deadline for other schools. And so the early action is typically for those students who are passionate about this school, they feel like they have a strong criteria to meet what that school is looking for, and they want to be considered early versus from the regular decision pack. Okay? All right, so I'm gonna keep it moving. I don't want to get too caught up in questions. We will have time to answer questions at the end, and I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to Mrs. Key.
All right, thank you. I'm Katie Keene, and I have the endearing term of test coordinator. So I get to share with you about the test arena. So testing has changed. The landscape looks a little different. We have test optional and test blind admissions. They've just been growing over the last decade, but practices really grew in the results of the pandemic. So taking the SAT and ACT could have been impossible for some students to get a date. An example of this happened just last weekend. I received some emails from some disappointed families that showed up to Sumner and the site canceled the SAT. So they are understanding. The universities do recognize College Board and ACT do not have control over that and can't allow your student to always test when they want to. So as a result, we've been told many colleges will continue to allow test scores to be optional for the next 2 years. So in other cases, some have changed their policies permanently, which is really exciting to hear for those that have test anxiety or haven't invested a lot in test prep. That's pretty exciting. But what is also motivating this trend is the new data. And it shows that universities are seeing more racial and socioeconomic differences among the students that are applying. So their populations are becoming more diverse, which is wonderful. So eliminating test scores definitely has encouraged more students to apply. Your best reference for which schools have gone this route is fairtest.org. And we encourage you to look at over 1,800 schools. There's nearly 4,000 in America, if you're curious. So quite a few have gone this route. And you'll notice all of our Washington colleges and universities, including Gonzaga, UW, WSU, they're all test optional. WSU and Eastern are actually test free. So that's exciting. 138 universities in California, so you've got the UC system that's test optional, 170 in New York. You can continue reading down this list. I put on some of the key ones that we see a lot of students apply to. They're all test optional for now, for the next 2 years. So do they really mean optional? I get this question a lot. And the Common App processes applications for over 1 million students. And what the data shows us actually is that 43% of these students went test optional. They did not submit their SAT and ACT scores. So I think it's safe to assume that fewer students are agonizing over the tests right now. So where you are seeing a lot of test scores submitted is the 10 states, mainly down in the South. So you've got Mississippi, Arkansas, Kansas, Alabama, Kentucky, North Dakota, Florida, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Missouri, still holding on to those test scores. So in states that universities have adopted the optional policy, you will also see that reflected in the student submission of scores. We are a test optional state, so our students tend not to stress about that and they're not all testing. So other states that are included in that, you definitely have Maine with less than 25% of their students submitting. We have Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, Oregon, California, New Hampshire, Maryland, and Connecticut. If those schools that your students are looking at are in those states, there's a good chance it's not a factor to submit your test unless it helps them. So what will we see in this coming year? I believe the option to apply without test scores is as long as it's widely available, students are going to choose that option. So there's going to be more emphasis placed on just looking at students holistically, which we've seen in the past couple of years. I think those same statistics will continue to trend. So should I submit my scores? We've got SAT results and ACT results. If you possess a score at or above the school's median composite score, we like that. We like the students to submit them because it may improve their chances of admission. Of course, there are some exceptions where you don't get that choice. We have some athletic programs that will require your athlete to submit their test score. There's some special programs, sometimes scholarships based on that. There's also some East Coast schools, Georgetown and MIT, holding strong to test scores. And then there's some of the southern colleges that I mentioned in the States already, along with the U.S. military academies, and we've got some private religious colleges. So you want to be sure to check the fairtest.org for the requirements of that school in particular that you're looking at. Yes, question?
What is the turnaround for the SAT results?
Good question. It's approximately 10 to 20 days after test date. Okay. We always, let's see here, go to the next slide. Oops. Okay, so we always encourage students to take both the tests if they're going that route, given they cover slightly different things, and one test will generally come out at 25% higher score for a student than the other. So when you wonder which test your student should take, or which one they need to prep more for and submit, we have a great website called Compass Prep available to us with tools. And this one in particular, this tool is the concordance table. And so it will give you a concorded score. It's not a perfect prediction, but it's an indicator of how a student would perform if you know one of the test scores. And if you can go down the column and you can identify where they're at on the SAT, and then use that table to see what the ACT composite score would be. And it's going to be, give or take, 2 points off from what they actually would do if they were to take that today without any further prep. And then on the other hand, if you know the ACT score, using this table, you can estimate that a student's score for the SAT is going to be a standard error, approximately, give or take 80 points. So it's pretty close. It really will be accurate. I keep hitting. Sorry. Okay, so we, again, are referring to Naviance. When you see this screen, Naviance is a wonderful tool to use to see how your students' test scores and their GPA compare to other students who have applied from Bellarmine. So the admission data has been collected since 2008, which is what is being referenced right here. So you can see the comparison bar graphs with your students' information for each college that you look up under the college tab. So this one in particular, I imitated that I was a student looking at UW. So you can see how they compare. And in this example, this student has, you can see a 3.6 GPA, and they scored 1470 on the SAT. So if they were to apply to UW, the bar graph indicates that the GPA is slightly lower than other Bellarmine students who were accepted. They tend to have a higher GPA. But the SAT score, you'll see, is much higher than other students. So in this situation, would you submit a test score? Would you encourage your student to do that? Give me a thumbs up if you would. Absolutely, yeah. If it benefits them, we recommend that. Overall, UW would be a target school for this student because they're in the middle 50 percentile of accepted students. Okay, and so now we look at another aspect of the data that's provided to you in Naviance. You're going to still see this is the same student. It's underneath the admissions tab for UW. It includes all the data, again, from 2008 to present, and UW has an acceptance rate of 48%. And so last year we had 105 students apply there, and 44 of them were accepted. So we encourage you to use this data to help determine whether a school is the right fit for your student, and they can figure out if they're a safety, a target, or a reach school by this data. Can I do what? Oh. Who my student is? Okay, so I don't know if you can you see my cursor move? It's pretty little. But the student that I put into this picture is right here. It's kind of hard to see, but actually in your Naviance program, you can zoom in and make it bigger. So you'll be able to identify specifically where they are. And so just pointing out on this chart, you probably can tell my arrow is blocking part of it, but the GPA goes up the side on the left, and then you have the bottom. If I could show it to you, that would be the test scores. So where they come together, you'll notice there's going to be a plot. So we want to emphasize that students will send their test scores. It's their responsibility. They must visit collegeboard.org for an SAT or ACT.org for the ACT, log into their account, and I think it's a small fee of, I want to say it's under $15, $16 for each submission for their colleges. But it's really important that they are giving those two organizations enough time to get those test scores into the college that they're applying to by their due date. The due date is critical. It really is, for them to consider their file complete and to be evaluated. You just don't want lagging parts. Okay, so given the application due date, may allow your student to test one more time. You'll have to dig into that and decide. There's also a handout that was optional when you came in if you wanted to look at that to see when the upcoming ACT and SAT tests are coming, as well as when their test scores would be available. You can look at that and determine if there's still time enough to do one more test before your student's application due date. So the company then will allow you to choose to send your scores without seeing them for free on that test date if you're coming up upon this. Under normal circumstances, we would not advise that. You want your student to evaluate their test scores and what they got on those tests before they submit them to a college. You don't usually want them to see what happens before you do. So there are also waivers I want to make mention of, that if finances are a challenge, we have the option to cover that cost for you. So let us know or have your student see us for that. So by now we recommended that most students have already taken one or both of the tests in their junior year, and now they may need to just retake the one that they did better on and in the fall of this year. So fortunately for some, I hear there are already those jumping on the bandwagon to sign up. We're hosting an in-school SAT for those that need it on October 12th. That's just for the seniors. If they want to sign up, we sent a link out to their email that they can use last Friday. They can also refer to the Bellarmine website, and you'll find a link there. It is your student that needs to sign up using their Bellarmine email. I know we've had some concerned parents saying that the link doesn't work for them. Encourage your student to do that with their Bellarmine account, their Google. Okay, any questions? Yeah. Yes, yes, absolutely. Both ACT and SAT will allow that. Yeah, so they can retest and use what that refers to is a composite score. So you can take one aspect of one test where you scored high on, and another test day you scored high in the other area, and put them together for a super score. That's what she's referring to. Okay. Oh. Yeah, the school will. Yes. All right. Well, thank you for your time. We have Miss, well, it says Mr. Irving, but we know it's Mrs. Mrs. Irving and Mr. Scotty. All right. So I'm Mrs. Irving, but I have a guy's first name, so that's cool. All right, so scholarships. This is the good part where we talk about money. So scholarships are based off of lots of different things. So I get a lot of questions where parents will be like, tell me what scholarships are available to my student. That is such a broad question. Do you have 3 hours? Scholarships are based off of lots of different things. They're based off of merit. They're based off of what major your student has. Are they left-handed? Are they blonde? Are you Asian? Do you have a Pekingese dog? Volunteer service, geography, art, theater, music, sports, all kinds of stuff. I mean, I remember when I was a student here, my mom actually told me about a left-handed student's scholarship, and that there was a scholarship for people with Pekingese dogs. That's why I mentioned those two. I was not going to apply for a Pekingese dog owner's scholarship because I didn't like our Pekingese dog, but it did exist. But there are lots of different ones, and they're as deep as you want to dig, you can find something, really, truly. But the best way is to look through the university that they're hoping to attend, honestly. 80% of scholarship money is given directly from universities. So a lot of what we talk about is university-given aid, direct money, and then we'll talk about indirect money that comes from other organizations. And I think Mike is going to speak to this in a little bit, so I don't want to steal his thunder too much, but what we do is we have a scholarship newsletter. It used to be sent out once a month, but honestly, I don't have that much content to give you, so I don't want to send you a blank newsletter that is just like, hey, there might be some scholarships, look on this, look on that. I only like to send you guys emails if they're necessary. I don't know about you, but I get an email every 2 minutes. I calculated it out this year. That's a lot of email. If you don't need it, I'm not going to send it to you. Really, I think it's important to only send emails that are necessary. So I'm not going to send you a blank scholarship email that you don't need. If it's something that's important, I will send it to you. If you didn't get it from me, it wasn't important. I think that's a fair agreement. But I will send you out a scholarship newsletter when there's something important that applies to your student. So I try to screen through those processes, and I try to find students that I know those scholarships are applicable to, and I will flag them and I will send them what I think is applicable to them. If I missed you, you can yell at me all you want. That's fine, and say you missed my student. But I really try hard to just screen out the kids that I don't think need those scholarship emails. So if I know for sure that this scholarship only applies to African American students, I'm going to send it only to the African American students, and I'm not going to waste time with students that I don't think it matters to. In Naudiance, you could look up those past scholarships though, so they're all accessible to you. If you go into Naudiance and you look up scholarships, you can see everything that we have, that we've ever had in the past. And if you think that that scholarship applies to your kid, please, by all means, apply to it. Absolutely. So it's there for you. It's not like we have some secret scholarship cult that we're hiding in the back. It's all available ready for you guys. As far as school scholarships go, that information can be a little bit tricky because schools make it accessible in certain ways. Sometimes it has to be your student is applying directly to the school, and sometimes when your student applies to the school, they may be considered for scholarships if they apply separately to a scholarship. And sometimes it may be they apply to the school, and sometimes they may have to apply by a separate deadline to be in consideration for the scholarship. So I urge you
to be on top of your students. I know you all are, because I've had lots of phone calls from concerned parents that are thinking that their kids aren't on top of scholarship deadlines and on top of application deadlines. Look at those dates and make sure that if they are supposed to be applying by a certain deadline, that that is also the scholarship consideration deadline. Sometimes it might be a bit earlier. An example would be USC. I always use USC as an example because that's my alma mater, and I very nearly missed the scholarship application deadline when I was a student there. Their regular decision deadline was January 15th, I believe, and their scholarship consideration deadline was a month earlier. And if I hadn't had my ducks in a row, I would have missed that. And if that was the case, I wouldn't be standing here saying I was an alumni from USC, because I wouldn't have had the money to go there myself. So it's important to pay attention to those things. Some other things that are important to look at: FastWeb, Washboard, Going Merry. Those are 3 scholarship clearinghouse websites. There's lots of scholarships available on those websites, but because there's lots of scholarships available on those websites, they're very competitive scholarships. So you're going to notice that they're potentially like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 scholarships, but lots and lots of students are applying to them. Don't necessarily let this discourage you, but just know that they are going to be more competitive than some of the other smaller scholarships that we might be pointing you towards in the springtime of senior year. There's professional and social organizations like the Elks Club, Kiwanis, Rotary, those types of organizations. Those are more scholarships that we know in the springtime when we direct your students towards them that we have a high success rate of winning those scholarships. So we know our students are going to get them for sure. So that is an organization that you have a good rate of success with. So if you have a student that's really involved in charity organizations or in giving back to the community, those are definitely places that you should point them towards. Your place of employment is another one. I know Topco Credit Union is a scholarship that is given to employees or children of employees. Boeing is another one that gives out scholarships. Amazon, trying to think of some others. But if you work for an organization, what's that? Coca-Cola. Yeah, I believe, I think Alaska Airlines has one. There's quite a few big companies that are native to the Northwest, and they really are big on giving back to the children of their employees. If your company doesn't have one, it never hurts to ask. I've heard lots of success with that, where employees have gone to their employer and said, hey, do you guys have a scholarship organization? And if they didn't, they started one because of that. So it's a great place to start as well. And I already said credit unions, so that's another one. We really do encourage our seniors to apply to at least one public in-state college as a fallback. Here's the reason why. You get a student that's all set to go and they're dreaming of going to USC. We'll say USC. I'll just throw myself under the bus there. They want to go to USC. USC is expensive. It's like, what is it now? $70,000 a year to go there? That's more than double what it was when I went there, okay? If my kids were coming to me and saying, Mom, I mean, my kids are 4, but still, I have twins, okay? Imagine both my twins came to me and said, Mom, we want to go to USC. I'd be like, nope, shutting that down right now. How much money did you get? And they were like, nothing. Nope, not going to happen. Where would I send them? In-state. I direct them to an in-state school. Absolutely. And then they come back and tell me, I didn't apply to an in-state college. What would be my next stop? Their counselor's office. Why didn't you make them apply to an in-state school? Why did you let them have such high hopes? Right? So it's almost like our due diligence to make them apply to at least one school that we know is a reasonable school they can get into, that hopefully with some aid they can afford to go to, right? And they'll hopefully enjoy and isn't too far away from mom and dad, because God knows you get there the first month of college and all you do is cry and want to come home. If you're anything like I was. My first month, all I did was say, I want to come home and be a nursing major at UW. So that's why we do that. It's not to try and question that you haven't thought things through or that they don't know what they want in life. It's just a backup plan, okay, financially and emotionally. So that's the reason for that. And we had a pandemic, right? And so many kids ended up having to go to school online, and they were like, why am I paying $70,000 to go to an online class when I could be doing this at University of Washington or Washington State for the same, for a third of the price, and not having to do all this, yeah. Okay, so college out of state. This is where we talk about WUI scholarships. So, it can be sad. It can be really sad when you think about being far away from your family and how much money it can cost. But with a WUI scholarship, it can be really happy. And this has happened to us more than enough times where we've had this situation come across our desks where you've told kids, they go home, they tell their parents, I got into yada yada, this is my dream school. And parents are like, how am I gonna pay for that? And then the fight ensues. The March through April 15th, April 30th fight. And then they come see us and they're like, I can't go to my dream school, my parents hate me. My life is over. I'm like, let me see your list. Let's look at what you got into. Then we talk about this. Then we talk about the WUI scholarship. And we're like, hey, did you know that you're eligible for like $16,000 off your tuition because you're a 3-8 student and you applied to Boise State? I am. Yeah. And that means that you're not going to have to pay student loans till you're 43. Really? Yeah, really. So, the WUI scholarship, the Western Undergraduate Exchange, offers reduced non-resident tuition to students in the West studying at over 160 schools. These are the states that participate. And it's not all Idaho and Montana. Just saying. And not that I have anything against Idaho and Montana, but there's some other states in there, including California and Hawaii. So, these are the states that participate. Let's give you an example of how this tuition works. Okay, it's typically 150% of the enrolling state's resident tuition, but sometimes they offer what's called a WUI scholarship, where it's just a cut. They'll give you like this many $1,000, and sometimes they have levels of it. So what I used in this example is the WUI scholarship from Boise State. So their resident tuition is $8,000, right? $8,300. Their non-resident tuition is $2,500. That's a lot of money, okay? About the same as UW. Then you look at their WUI scholarship and it's $14,500. And I can't tell you, I think last year we had like 6 or 7 kids get it. And I think the year before that we had like 6 or 7 kids get it. And I think the year before that we had like 6 or 7 kids get it. Okay, that saves you 14 grand each year. So their tuition ended up being about $14,000. Not bad. Okay? That doesn't include room and board. So, it's going to go right back up again because you have to pay room and board those freshman and sophomore years if it's required, or just their freshman year. But that's only for 1 or 2 years. Then, after that, you're hoping that they have a job, they're finding an apartment on their own, they're learning how to work for themselves, they're learning how to sell their books back after the semester's over, they're learning how to make that sweet, sweet moolah on their own, and they can learn to self-sustain a little bit. But that's just an estimate of how much it can save you. So it's a pretty good deal. So if you have a kiddo that's really heart set on a really, really, really expensive school, these are some good backup schools. Look for the WUI, okay? And that website right there, that wiche.edu/WUI, that's where you can find a comprehensive list of all of those. And these slides are going to be available to you guys on our Naviance webpage under document resources. So if you're not taking notes fast enough, don't panic. It's okay. We don't expect you to be in college anymore. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Scotti, who's going to talk to you about NC2A information.
Mine will be short, but I think it'll be really important for students considering playing sports in college. And I'm going to talk a little bit about NCAA information, and then talk about NAIA schools and some interesting data on that. So just with students that are interested, we want them to come in the office and pick up the information release form that if they're 18 they can sign. But if they're not, then we ask that they have there's a parent signature on that. And once that's submitted to us, then we can release transcripts if coaches, contact us about the student wanting that. I've had quite a few athletic directors reach out for that. So if your student is still, I know senior year, a lot of things can happen. I'll jump to a little story here. I was going to save it for later, but we had a West Point student that played lacrosse, and I asked her, are you going to play in the team? She said, I wasn't thinking about it. I was like, you should walk on. She did, and her dad told me today she is on and made the West Point lacrosse women's team. And that was today. So things can change really quickly. He asked, they needed that transcript. He sent me a link, and I sent that in right away. So if your student are interested in sports, then that's something to kind of always be open to. You might have these conversations happen later. There's an interest. I had a student, another student that told me at first he was a high-level soccer player. He told me, no, I'm not going to play soccer in college. Well, guess what? He went to a camp. It was an ID camp. Coach saw him, loved him, offered him a scholarship. He's already started. He actually called me and he's like, hey, I'm playing. Thank you so much for following through. And so he's playing right now at Washington University. So a lot of things can happen really quickly. I don't know if your students have talked to you about playing sports in college, but I know if they get that information in, we will have that ready for them, given if somebody contacts them. I just wanted to mention here, you can see, you want to have your student register on the NCAA Eligibility Center as well. Okay, and there's a link to that through the NCAA website. You need to be certified in the center to compete for Division I, NCAA Division I or Division II. You also need to create a certification account that's mandatory for any visits to a Division I and Division II school. And then you also have, and that's also necessary for receiving a letter of intent. So if your student is interested in that or is already in the works to do that, they need to sign up for that. And that, you can see that cost went up a little bit. It was $90 last year. It's $100 this year. So that will help them follow the process. Okay. I played soccer at Oregon State, NCAA 1. We did not have that. We went there and we got everything all at once. So I think what they're doing now is a little bit of a better system for students, student athletes especially. And also there's the eligibility worksheet. Most likely your student is going to be eligible unless they're like coming in as a transfer student. Graduating from Bellarmine, you're going to get 26 credits. You're going to be good. But the worksheet will help them make sure that they're following all eligibility requirements. I just added this. I just kind of copied and pasted their website. But just NAIA, if you don't know what that is, and it's just another, it's like the NCAA, but they're smaller schools. It's called the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics. It's constantly evolving. There's there's colleges that are coming over. Some prominent athletes that come to mind There's a few women's basketball players. I can't remember the one. She played for the Monarchs. I can't remember her last name. She's a long last name. But some male football players that just, are some of my idols. Walter Payton was an NAIA athlete, and also Scottie Pippen. We share the same name. And I think Elgin Baylor is. But some of the schools they were on before have switched. They were NAIA, and now they're NCAA Division I. So if you hear of Grand Canyon, they were an NAIA school. Now they are NCAA Division I. So a lot of those schools have kind of switched a little bit. But you can see 77,000 student athletes, 250 schools, 21 conferences, and 28 championships. So a lot of opportunity for kids to play. NAIA, I looked it up for lacrosse, women, girls, women's lacrosse is huge right now. And I'm so glad to see that moving forward here. 42 colleges around the country, out of those 250 schools, 42 of them are competing either in the college, and they also talk about invitational. There's some that are invitational and some are emerging, but that's quite a number. There's no programs NAIA for men. It's only emerging and invitational right now. So that tells you kind of like, how things are transforming. I just wanted to add this last slide here about the conference, the Cascade Collegiate Conference for the Northwest. And this has, again, been, evolving. You can see, if you've not heard of these schools, from Washington, we only have, I think there's only 3 schools here. Northwest College, that's in Kirkland. Evergreen, yes, Evergreen. And there's one more. Oh, Walla, yes. Sorry, it's far south. So 3 of the Washington schools, but then a number of them are mostly Oregon. A couple from Idaho, 1 in BC, 3 in Montana. So that's a great little league if your student is still interested. And we always talk about the Huskies and the Cougars. But for sports or NCAA Division I, there's so many. If kids are interested, that's where I have some expertise in knowing. Sometimes the students come in, they want to play sports, and they go, "I want to play sports first." School, yeah, I'm going to get my degree. I'm not maybe as interested. So you'd be surprised, when things change. They go through with their senior year, like I still want to play, and then they can get scholarship. So have them come talk to us or me in particular about certain things, especially for NAIA if they're interested. But a lot of good information, and I just the NAIA website. If you put in the criteria of the sport and the schools, you'll see where they're located. So most of those, like I mentioned, lacrosse, those girls teams, there's 42. Most of them are, Tennessee, Florida, in the Midwest. So it just kind of takes some investigating if they're really interested in that. Okay, I think Mike, you're up next.
All right, good evening, everybody. There's only 2 minutes left to the Seahawks game, so I'm going to have to talk really fast if we're going to get for the end. My name is Mike Frechette. I'm the Director of Student Financial Services at Pacific Lutheran University in Parkland. Any Lutes here tonight? Woo, go Lutes. All right. Yeah, so this is our agenda. This is what we're going to cover tonight. I'm going to take you through the financial aid application process, talk about who's eligible to apply, how your student applies, how you assist your student in applying, the types of aid that your student might be eligible for, how schools might determine what type of aid your student is eligible for, and then what to expect as you move through the admission process this season with your seniors. Okay, so financial aid in a nutshell is funding that helps families pay for the cost of attending college when the cost exceeds their ability to do so on their own. Okay, and there are two major categories of financial aid. There is, and I'm sorry these slides are a little cut off. I think that's my fault on this PowerPoint. There's gift aid, which is free money. Okay, that's money that does not have to be repaid. So scholarships, which are often merit-based or based on some type of talent or some type of characteristic that the student might be bringing to the institution. And there are grants, which are typically need-based. Okay, and then there is the other category is self-help. That's money that either has to be paid back after graduating or money that has to be earned while the student's there in school, so either loans or work study, okay? So who's eligible to apply? So the primary application to apply for financial aid is the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, and all U.S. citizens and non-citizens with permanent resident status are eligible to apply for federal student aid. Okay, and most institutions will require the FAFSA as well, and will be considered for their own need-based aid, because a lot of especially the private schools with high sticker prices, do have need-based aid as well, and they'll usually use tools like the FAFSA in order to determine need-based aid eligibility. For undocumented students in the state of Washington, there is a Washington application for financial aid, which is available on the Washington Student Achievement Council's website, and that's an option too for undocumented students in this state. All right, so how do you apply? What's the order of operations? I mean, typically you apply for admission first to the schools that your student is interested in attending, and then you apply for financial aid, but you can submit the FAFSA at any point after October 1st, even if you haven't applied to all the schools yet, okay? It's totally fine if a school that your student is interested in gets the FAFSA before they've actually finished applying for admission, okay? So don't get too caught up on the order of operations there. Once it is time to apply for financial aid, the student and the parent, because I'm assuming most traditional 18-year-olds are going to be considered dependent students. So the student and the parent will need what's an FSA ID, Federal Student Aid ID. And that's the link where you can apply for that if you haven't done so already. And I think you'll make these slides available, right? Okay, perfect. So, and that's what's used for the parent and the student to electronically sign the FAFSA once the form is completed, okay? And there's the link to complete the FAFSA. It becomes available on October 1st, 2022. So just in a few weeks' time, it'll become available, okay? We always encourage students to apply for financial aid as early as possible to give themselves the best shot of qualifying for any aid that might be limited, okay? Some schools have limited pots of funds, and sometimes it is first come, first serve, not always, but sometimes that is the case, so it doesn't hurt to apply as soon as possible. And then many schools also have other application items besides the FAFSA that you'll need to submit. So you'll need to check with the individual financial aid offices of the schools that your student might be interested in applying to. Many of the big private schools require the CSS profile, which was mentioned earlier. Some institutions even have their own institutional aid application that they might require as well. So just make sure you're on top of that with each school that your student's applying to. The FAFSA website looks like this, okay? And the reason I show a picture of it is because we don't want anybody going to a website where they might be asked to pay something to submit the FAFSA or ending up on a website that's not completely legitimate, okay? So this is the FAFSA website. This is what it looks like, okay? It's studentaid.gov/h/apply-for-aid/FAFSA, okay? That's where you want to go to apply to submit the FAFSA and begin the application process. So what are the different types of aid that you might qualify for on the basis of the FAFSA? So I'm going to talk about federal aid first, okay? the country's signature grant program for families that demonstrate financial need is the federal Pell Grant program, okay? The maximum amount for the current school year that we just started is $6,895, okay? And in addition, Pell recipients can also receive a supplemental education opportunity grant, depending on how much funding in that grant the institution has. So those grant amounts can range anywhere from $100 to $4,000, just depending on how much funding the school gets for that particular aid program. Federal direct student loans from the Department of Education are also something that you'll probably see offered as part of your student's financial aid package if you do submit the FAFSA. These are the amounts that are typically available to students in their first, second, and third years, okay? If you demonstrate need for it, then a portion of each of these amounts is what is called subsidized, meaning that the interest on that subsidized portion would be covered by the government while your students in school at least have time, okay? There's a federal nursing loan as well for students who are admitted directly into nursing programs, so that's something that if your student is interested in nursing and you don't see it right away on the financial aid notice and you are interested in borrowing or need to borrow, that might be something you ask the financial aid office if they have funding for, because not every school has funding for the federal nursing home program. And then there's federal work study as well, and work study it's not money that gets credited directly to the tuition account, but it's money that a student can earn while they're at school. And it gets paid to them just like a regular paycheck. And there is a work study program through the federal government. There is one in the state of Washington through the state governments for students who attend schools in the state of Washington. And many institutions, PLU included, we have our own funds set aside for general student employment programs as well for students who don't qualify for need-based work study. So that's something you want to ask about as well, okay, if your student is interested in that. Moving on to state aid. So if your student is going to college or university in the state of Washington and your family demonstrates financial need, there is Washington state aid available. The Washington College Grant, and this is based on family income and household size. The maximum amount in the Washington College Grant for 22-23 is $9,739. And if your student signed up for it in 7th or 8th grade, they may also be eligible for the College Bound Scholarship, which is also a need-based scholarship, and that the amount of that scholarship this year is $2,256. So for students who qualify for the maximum in both of these, the state of Washington provides almost $12,000 in state grant funding to students who need it the most, which is really fantastic. It's actually one of the most generous state aid programs in the entire country. And like I said, there's also a state work study program through Washington, and I always mention this last one, but I don't know how plentiful these are. I don't work at a public institution. I never have in the state of Washington, but I know that the publics in Washington have a reserved number of full tuition and fee waivers that they can offer to students and families. I really don't know how they're distributed, so, but it's worth, if your student is applying to Wazoo or UW, it might be worth asking the financial aid office to see if that is an available option. Okay. Now, institutional school aid. So this is really, and this was mentioned earlier, this is really the biggest source of financial aid in the country, especially for students who are applying to private institutions with high sticker prices. So at a school like PLU, for instance, where we do have a higher sticker price, it's often, almost always, the largest part of the financial aid package. It can be based on merit and talent, as well as demonstrated financial need based on the FAFSA or the LASFA. And there are a lot of different other types of scholarships as well that aren't just talent or need-based. What we call, some of them are called legacy scholarships. I'll mention a couple. So at PLU, we have one for confirmed Lutherans. We have some, and these are directly from us, so these aren't at FastWeb or scholarships.com, but directly from the institution. Some schools have sibling scholarships. We have some for children of alumni or children of ministers and pastors. So if you're applying to a school and you think your student has a characteristic like that, that might fit with the school's identity or mission, it's worth asking about. I mean, if somebody's applying to, a Catholic institution here, and your student's a confirmed Catholic, you may want to ask if there's, something available along those lines, okay? And then, of course, criteria and award amounts will vary. Every institution has their own process for awarding their merit-based financial aid. They all have different amounts depending on the strength of the student's admission application. And they all have different levels of need-based aid too, depending on what the institution can afford to award in terms of need-based financial aid, okay? So in a few minutes, we'll look at a sample award letter, so you can kind of see what you should be looking for when you start getting financial aid packages in the mail. Any questions before I keep going? I've been talking a lot right now. Which I am. Okay, good. Yes, and check out other options for financial aid as well. There are generous VA benefits for children of dependents of veterans. Lots of different scholarship organizations, like Mrs. Irving was already mentioning, through your church, through the Rotary, through the Elks Club. So look into those, different community-based organizations that you might have some connection to, and see if there's scholarship opportunities there that are available. And then, of course, I know it's always a last resort for families, and it should be, but there are private student loans and parent loans available as well. Parent loans available through the Department of Education, and private student loans through a variety of commercial lenders. And most institutions will have information about that on their website with links to where you can go to apply for those different loan options, okay? So how is financial need determined? The formula is pretty simple, actually. We take the cost of attendance, which is not just tuition and fees, but room and board, and other indirect expenses that a student is going to face when they get to college, like books and supplies and personal expenses and things like that. We subtract from that what's called the expected family contribution, or the EFC. That's the number that gets calculated by the FAFSA, okay? So the difference between the cost of attendance and the EFC is what your family's financial need is, as determined by the FAFSA, okay? We know it doesn't always reflect reality, but it's the best tool that's available right now to measure a family's financial strength and award financial aid, okay? So what does the cost of attendance include? So I was already kind of mentioning some of this. In some award letters, you'll see this referred to as the financial aid budget as well. But tuition and fees and room and meals, we call these direct costs, because these are things you're going to be charged for directly on the bill, okay? That'll be due directly to the institution, okay? The indirect costs, which are also part of the cost of attendance and which are also used to determine financial aid eligibility, are things like books and supplies, personal expenses, miscellaneous, transportation, stuff like that. These are things, you won't get billed for these by the institution, but they're real costs, and they are included in the cost of attendance budget, okay? And yes, it can also include, on a case-by-case basis, costs for daycare. If there is a student who, is caring for a child, or, uniforms for students who are in, like, healthcare internships, for instance, or the cost of a computer. These are adjustments that can be made by the school at their own discretion, okay? So, we show this slide because we think it kind of shows you why private schools and why most of the aid in the country actually comes directly from colleges and universities. So in red, you'll see the expected family contribution, the number that's calculated by the FAFSA. So in this instance, the family's expected contribution was $6,000 per year annually, okay? That number doesn't change no matter where the student goes to school, because the FAFSA is the same wherever you send it. What's different is the cost of attendance at the different schools that your student might be applying to. So at a four-year public, the cost of attendance might be around $24,000. Whereas at a 4-year private, it might be closer to 56, 57,000. And now it's even higher. I really need to update this because, as we were saying, USC is close to 70,000 now, total cost of attendance. And then 2-year community college, that'll have the lowest cost of attendance, obviously. So you can see the amount of aid, which is in green, the financial need, which is in green, is going to be wildly different depending on what the type of institution that your child goes to. Okay, but at a 4-year private, you can expect to get the biggest financial aid packages there because that's where the financial need will be greatest. Okay. So how is the EFC calculated? I won't go through the entire formula. There was some economist somewhere who dreamed it up, and it is pages and pages long. But if you're trying to fall asleep one night and you want to Google EFC formula, I welcome you to do that and read through it. But I can give you the significant factors that are used in the calculation of the expected family contribution. So the student's dependency status. Like I said, most traditional 18-year-olds are considered dependent on their parents. So obviously their parents' financial information is going to be a big part of the EFC calculation. The 2021 income. So the FAFSA uses income from 2 years prior. Okay, so in the 23-24 application cycle, it's going to be looking at your 2021 income tax returns. Okay, it's going to look at household size, the number of other children that you have in college as well, besides just the student that we're here talking about tonight. The value of assets, excluding the equity in your principal residence and anything in a designated retirement account. But anything else you have in assets will have to be listed on the FAFSA, and that'll be part of the calculation of the EFC. And then the age of the older parent as well, believe it or not. So the older the parent, the closer they are to retirement, presumably, and the more of the asset net worth that gets protected in the calculation of the EFC. Okay? So yes, if you have a lot of gray hair, you should be celebrating tonight, you know? So, going to the, oh, sorry, you have a question. Yes. Yeah, so that's a great question. What about the case of a divorce? That's coming up in just a couple of slides, so I'm going to address that. But that's a great question. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So who's an independent student then? Like I said, the majority of 18-year-olds are going to be dependent students for the purposes of filing for financial aid, but to become an independent student, you know, your child would have to have been born before January 1st of 2000 or married at the time of filing the FAFSA, you know, caring for a child, serving on active duty. Both parents would have to be deceased. They would have to be considered homeless. Not all of these things, but they would have to meet one of these criteria. So, yeah, that would be a tall order to meet. But yeah, if the student is independent, then parent financial information is not needed. Okay, but like I said, in most cases, it's going to be. So who's the parent? It's the legal or biological parent. And in cases where the parents are divorced, so to get to the question here, divorced or separated, the parent who completes the FAFSA is the parent with whom the child was living with the most during the previous 12 calendar months, okay? If that was a 50-50 split of time spent between both parents, then it's the parent who provides the most financial support in the previous 12 months, okay? If the parent who's filling out the FAFSA, okay, remarries, regardless of any prenuptial agreements that might be in place or any other third-party agreements in place, that new spouse has to put their financial information on the FAFSA, okay? That's a federal requirement. We don't have any way to get around that. It also includes both parents if they are living together, regardless of their gender or marital status, okay? So biological parents who never got married, but who live together in the same household, and both parents will be included in the FAFSA in that particular instance, okay? And it excludes any grandparents or financial information for any other relatives living in the household, unless they were the adoptive parent of the student, okay? Any questions about that? Yes?
Are custodial accounts considered the parents, the child asset?
So custodial accounts, like a 529 plan or something?
No, but it's not a 529, but it's separate, like investment accounts.
Yeah, so it's in both the child and the parent's name. So in
What's
that
the
particular
question?
case, it can be reported as a parent asset. You actually want it reported as a parent asset because when the EFC is calculated, it actually would expect more from student assets because the assumption is the student has no other expenses besides college education right now. So it would actually ask for a huge percentage of the student assets. Much more of the parent assets are protected in the formula. So yeah, so you do want to, put that on the parent side if you're able to. So it's a good question. Yes? Yeah, so there are enormous changes coming to the financial aid application process. That was part of the, one of the coronavirus packages that got passed in 2020. The timeline on that's been extended. So the biggest changes, the ones you're referring to, won't happen until the 24-25 award year. Yeah. Yep. Yes?
Could you aid us by repeating the question? We can't hear it from back here.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So she was mentioning that there were big changes coming to the FAFSA, such as like the EFC is going away. It's going to be replaced by a student aid index instead. The FAFSA is going to become much shorter and much simpler. Those changes are happening 2 years from now, so the FAFSA you're filing right now is going to be pretty much what it's been for the last number of years. But when it comes time to reapply, so you do need to reapply for financial aid every single year at your institution, you'll want to make sure you understand if there are any changes to the process at whatever school your student goes to for 24-25, because there are big changes coming to the application process for that year. So. Okay. All right, so submitting the FAFSA, the student can list up to 10 schools on the FAFSA, okay? And if your student's applying to more than 10 schools, that's fine. They submit one FAFSA transaction, give it a few days, let those 10 schools get the FAFSA, and then you can log back into the FAFSA, delete a few school codes, and then put some additional school codes on there if your child is applying to like 13 colleges, for instance, and you want to send the FAFSA to 13 schools. Okay, so yeah, it is possible to send the FAFSA to more than 10 schools. Parents do need to sign with their own FSA ID and password. We highly discourage you from sending in a paper FAFSA. The processing time must be ridiculously slow. I don't even know if anybody at the Department of Education is working there anymore who would process that. So there's one person in the basement of our building somewhere. Yeah, so we highly encourage doing the online FAFSA. Your FAFSA is not to submit it until you see a confirmation page, okay? So sometimes at the end, like it feels like you're continuing and continuing and submitting. Make sure you get that confirmation. Make sure you see that confirmation before you log off or exit out of your screen. Okay. And then there is a link for a FAFSA overview if you wanted to kind of familiarize yourself with the formula before you actually embark on filling it out. So anyway, so what happens next? After your school receives the FAFSA, assuming your child's been admitted to that school, you'll get an offer of financial aid outlining what the cost of attendance is and what financial aid is available to the student, okay? And then you'll need to determine the net cost of attending each school based on how much aid's been provided, okay? And then based on that, and not that alone, there are other factors to consider as well, like, proximity to your home, the academic, is this the right academic fit for my child, things like that. May 1st is typically the traditional priority date for letting schools know whether or not you're attending. And so yeah, I think that's still generally the date that your guidance counselors here would have your students be aiming for. Would be May 1, okay? To have a decision made about where they'll be attending school in the fall. So this is what a sample award letter looks like at PLU. I know the print's a little small, so I apologize about that. But in the top box, we list, that top yellow box lists our direct costs. Okay, so that would be tuition and fees, room and board, okay? If you go down to the next section, that second highlighted yellow box is a sum of all the scholarships and grants that this particular student qualified for. So in this case, the student got not only PLU academic scholarships, but got federal and state grants as well, okay? So their total grant package was $46,827. When you subtract that from the direct costs, then they really only owe about $6,000 out of pocket to PLU. That doesn't include the indirect expenses we were talking about earlier, like transportation to and from home and books and supplies and things like that. But you can see that the grants and scholarships that the student received provide a significant discount on the sticker price, okay? So yes, I know sticker prices are alarming. They are, but really what you want to be looking at is the net cost, the net price after scholarships and grants. And yeah, if you're applying to a school like USC, which is at $70,000, and you don't get anything, and the net price really is $70,000, then yeah, then you have a big decision to make there. But if you get like a massively generous package from them, which cuts the cost down to only like $10,000 per year, then that might be an exciting moment for your family for sure. Okay. And then we list at PLU, we list other options that students might use to cover that $6,000 if they can't fully pay it out of pocket, like loans, which we talked about. We have payment plan options at PLU, things like that. So, and I'm sure all the institutions that your children are applying to have these same options available as well that we offer at PLU. Okay, so oops, I'm just gonna speed through this because I already talked about all this. Yeah, so when can you expect to see this happening? I would say, you know, from private colleges and universities, probably in the late fall is when, well, it sounds like you want all students to be applying by November 30th, right? Yeah, so you'll probably be getting, you know, admission letters and financial aid packages, you know, pretty shortly after the holidays. So I would imagine that's, you know, mostly when you start seeing those. I know that UW typically waits until mid-March, I think, to release their admission decisions and their financial aid awards. So yeah, so there might be some waiting into the spring for, you know, for the U, for instance. But and then community colleges are pretty much open enrollment, so they'll just continue going, you know, throughout the entire cycle. So some things to remember. The 23-24 FAFSA, it's still going to be the same FAFSA that we've been filling out for years. The big changes aren't coming till 24-25. It's going to be looking at 2021 income. When you fill out the FAFSA, you can actually choose to use a tool called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, and it will auto-populate your FAFSA with all of your 2021 tax information, so you won't even have to be doing a lot of data entry, which is nice. So if you're able to use the tool when you're filling out that FAFSA, I would recommend it. It will save you a lot of time and ensure that everything is filled out accurately on your FAFSA. One important thing to note, the FAFSA does not consider special circumstances, okay? So if 2021 was a really good year for you financially, but you know things have taken a downturn and your financial situation's changed, schools, starting in 23-24, schools have to entertain requests for reconsideration now. That is one change that's coming in 23-24. So it used to be that schools could deny requests for reconsideration, but that's no longer the case. You can appeal for more financial aid if your financial situation has changed. Every school will have their own process for this. We have our own forms for it at PLU. I'm sure Other schools will have their own individualized forms and documentation that they'll want you to submit. But just keep that in mind. If your situation's changed considerably since 2021, then you'll want to reach out to the individual financial aid offices of the schools your student's applying to and find out what the process is for appealing for more financial aid. Okay? Review your aid and the net cost carefully before deciding on a school. Okay, make sure you understand precisely what the net cost is and not just what the sticker price is or not what the cost is after loans, because remember, loans have to be paid back. You want to know what the net cost is after scholarships and grants. Okay? Receiving financial aid every single semester requires that your students actually go to class and do their homework. Okay? So they have to maintain a cumulative GPA of 2.0 at the end of each semester. Okay, so it's not a super high bar, but it's still something that they need to be aware of, that the government just doesn't hand out money for students who are not going to be passing with at least a C average. Okay, and then you have to reapply for financial aid every year, resubmit the FAFSA every year. Okay. Every school is required to have on their website a net price calculator. So if you go on a school's website, you can enter in some basic information about your students' GPA test scores, some basic information about your family's finances, and it would be able to give you an estimate of what the financial aid package might look like at that particular institution. So if you'd like to do this in advance to try to do some planning now before the financial aid packages start coming, you can go to institutions' websites and look for their net price calculator there, okay? And finally, yeah, keep all your options open until you have all the information you need to make a decision, including the financial information. Don't pay anyone to do the FAFSA or to apply for scholarships. These should be free services, okay? Some FAFSA filers may be selected for a process called verification. This is down the road, so you don't need to worry about it too much, but if your FAFSA is selected, you know, there is some documentation that you would need to submit to your institution so that they could verify that the financial information that you put on the FAFSA was accurate, okay? If you're selected, you'll know. They would contact you, okay? We mentioned washboard.org, but yeah, there's lots of other great websites for private scholarships as well, such as scholarships.com, FastWeb, Go Mary, I think was another one you mentioned. Yeah, so lots of scholarships, you know, clearinghouses out there that will try to match up your students with different private scholarships that they think they might qualify for based on the profile they create on the website. Okay? And if you have questions, talk to your guidance counselors. Go to the financial aid websites of the schools that you're applying to. We're required to have lots of information on there by the Department of Education, so there's tons of information to read on these financial aid websites. And you can always email or call the school's financial aid office as well, okay? And I think that's it. Anybody have any remaining questions? Yes, sir. Yes, so the question, that's correct. So the question was, so the FAFSA becomes available after October 1st, correct. And when you go and fill out the FAFSA and submit it, at that same time, you are also indicating the schools that you want the FAFSA sent to. It's all part of the same process. Yep. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that's a good question. So if you have 2 children who are going to college, you have to do separate FAFSAs for each of them, and the answer is yes. You get double the fun because the FAFSA is the student's application. It's not the parent's application. So there has to be a FAFSA application on file for each student. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
So every year when we do the FAFSA, is it October 1st still every year?
Yes.
And then will they tell you which paper passport you need for that new year? Like you could go, which year you might do my tax document, will they tell you, oh, this
Yes, they will. So do we have to renew the FAFSA every October 1st? Yes. And that date is not changing. And you'll know which tax year you have to submit for on the FAFSA. One of the big changes that's coming in 24-25 is that you won't even have the option to use this IRS data retrieval tool anymore. You know, supposedly, let's see how this rollout goes, but when you open the FAFSA, all your tax information is supposed to be there already, so you won't even have to really think about what tax year to put on the FAFSA anymore. Yeah. So, anything else? Yes, sir. Seattle won. Yeah, wow, close one. All right. Yeah, did you have a question, sir, in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, they do. So was the question was, do students have to sign the FAFSA as well? Yes. The parent and the student both need their own unique FSA IDs and passwords, and you both need to use those to sign the FAFSA when you submit it. Yes. And don't forget it, because you'll need it going into the future. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Are you able to speak to how the FAFSA system accounts for siblings and their respective expenses, whether in high school, like Bellarmine, with 3 at once, or in college?
Yes, so how does the FAFSA account for siblings who might be in college or who might be at private schools like Bellarmine? So the FAFSA does not account for siblings who are in private high schools or private K through 12 schools like Bellarmine, but that would be a special circumstance that you would want to write to the individual financial aid office about, because as financial aid administrators, we do have the latitude to account for those expenses manually when we're determining financial aid eligibility for the student who's enrolling at the college or university. If you have a sibling though in college, then that gets reported as a second household member in college on the FAFSA, and it does get accounted for on the FAFSA automatically just by virtue of saying there are 2 children in college, not just 1. Okay. You're welcome. Yes? You know, I don't have all the details about how that particular instance will be treated. I've heard that it won't be considered as much of a factor anymore in determining eligibility for the federal Pell Grant, but we haven't really seen a detailed rollout yet of what it will look like. Yeah. Yep. The question was, is that going away in 24-25, the sibling, accounting for siblings in college on the FAFSA, and it remains to be seen what it's going to look like. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
So we have one quick announcement, and then if there's any other further questions, we'll take like 5 minutes of questions from the audience.
I just wanted to make a quick plug. If some of you have checked your email box and received an email from me, we are inviting the college funding coach to come give some information next Monday at 6:30, same place. That is going to be free information for you for financial planning. If you have younger students still coming up through, trying to navigate how to fund college without losing your retirement, they're here to give you a bunch of information. She's flying in, so it should be really great. There's no obligation from you whatsoever. It's just free information. We'd love to see you here 6:30 next Monday on the 19th.
So if there's any other questions for any of us counselors, if you guys have anything that you'd like to ask us, we're going to be around for 5 minutes, so you can just come on up and